Okay, so welcome to class 2 of What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew. You can put your hands down. I see that we have a number of participants, and I'm really excited that you're joining me tonight. Um, Thanks for asking a question. I appreciate that. Um, I actually would like to take a few minutes and see if anyone had any questions from last week. Winnie is asking if there's a correlation between ADHD and poor sleep. And I think that a lot of kids with ADHD really struggle with sleep, and some of that has to do with a deficit in norepinephrine, which is responsible for sleep and alertness in the cerebellum. And so kids not only have a hard time kind of slowing their bodies down and getting ready for sleep, but also they have trouble waking up. In fact, some kids with ADHD have so much trouble waking up, they need to have several alarms. In addition, and oftentimes parents and kids are arguing in the morning. Getting up is a real chore. I actually had a client who had such difficulty waking up that ultimately I referred him to a sleep specialist, and it turned out that he had a sleep disorder. So I would say, yes, there is some correlations between ADHD and poor sleep. Does anyone else have any questions from our last class? If you do, please post them on the chat or the Q&A. I'd love to hear any of them. So I'm going to just keep starting and keep going with today's topic. And today's topic is what can we do to help manage ADHD school related issues like challenges with executive functioning, learning disabilities, or daily frustrations? And how can we set up homeschool programs that promote success and positive self esteem? What types of accommodations should you make sure that your son or daughter is receiving? And how can we reduce homework stress and create more effective studying? It's a tall order for an hour and 15 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is about the 5 C's of ADHD parenting. And we went over these 5 C's in our last class. And so, the first C, of course, is self control. Notice what triggers you and what some of the challenges are for you and for your child about school. You want to have some compassion for your child and realize that they can really only change one thing at a time. So you want to pick one particular behavior or challenge and work together with the school on addressing that. You want to collaborate with your son or daughter by making plans together that work towards improving that particular issue. You want to offer support, which is consistency in terms of noticing their efforts, redirecting them when it's necessary, and referring back to your mutually agreed upon plan over and over again. You want to create a feedback loop with the school so you know what's happening each week and in some cases daily. And finally, you want to celebrate any accomplishments towards achieving this goal, even if it's not fully completed. Now, last week, I gave you some homework and I asked you to write down and think about things that trigger you about your child's behavior. And it would be great if you would put some of those triggers up in your chat box because I'd like us to be able to share some of the things that are triggering us about our children. No shame, no blame. It's a shame free, blame free zone because I would imagine some of the things that trigger you about your son or daughter trigger other people. And this way, we can work together on solutions. And then I'd like to hear from you about ways that you manage those triggers successfully or help that you would like. So I would encourage you, does anyone have anything that triggers them specifically about their son or daughter that's related to school, since that's what we're talking about today? And if you do, and you'd put that up on the chat, that would be really great. So let me talk a little bit about school while I'm waiting. One person wrote tantrums and meltdowns about completing homework, about doing homework, question mark, question mark. What do you think? Um, School is often the worst domain of functioning for kids with ADHD. It's tougher for them to access what they know and use what they know. So That's because ADHD is a disorder of now, and it reflects difficulties with performance, not intelligence. But these often get confused. Now, the more severe your child the more severe the executive functioning challenges are for your child, the higher the likelihood is of a learning disability. So, getting some good responses in the chat box. Tantrums and meltdowns, starting and completing homework. That's great. We're going to be talking exactly about that today. And Mary says triggers, meltdowns that go on and on with no seeming resolution and raise the level of stress in the whole family. Let's talk about that. Getting home schoolwork done in a reasonable time frame, endless time involved in getting to bed when you're already tired. So next week, we're going to be talking specifically about tantrums and meltdowns that are not related to school, and those will have to do with the evening routine and the morning routine, as well as other times when things kind of fall apart. So don't worry, Mary, we're going to talk about that next week. But today, actually, we're going to continue to discuss meltdowns related to school and tantrums. So let's talk a little bit about the learning process. So when kids are in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, they are learning to read. They are learning a facility with numbers, counting, basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and they're learning to write. They're learning the act of writing, but they're also learning how to use writing as a form of self-expression. In the upper grades of elementary school, towards middle school, and most definitely in high school, kids are now reading to learn. They are using math to solve higher order problems of logic as well as quantity. And they're writing not just for self-expression, but for analysis and to express their thoughts about a subject, something they're reading or working on. Um, when kids are in school, they have to rely on their working memory. And working memory is one of those um, key executive functions. It has to do with, it's the computational space of the brain. And it's where we take information in and we do something with it. It's different than short-term memory because we're actually expected to do something with what we're learning. And in this case, working memory is affected in school in so many ways. One very small example of struggles with working memory have to do with listening to what a teacher is saying and writing notes simultaneously. Other kinds of working memory would be answering questions on a test without an answer bank to help cue you for those ideas. Other kinds of working memory are when your emotions are triggering you and you can't remember a certain kind of behavior that you know is appropriate that you've used in the past and apply it to the present. So working memory challenges are fundamental to school challenges, and they're something that are particularly difficult for kids with ADHD. Um, Another challenge for kids with ADHD, it has to do with cognitive processing speed. So how fast a brain absorbs and understands and information and metabolizes it. And it relates directly to overwhelm, and it is connected actually to working memory. Initiation, time management, planning, and impulse control are all executive functioning skills that help a student get through the day and complete projects, papers, and tests. Kids with ADHD work very hard to access the limited resources they have with these executive functioning skills when they're at school. And often when they get home, they out. Um, when I was teaching on the last few days, I asked people, what happens to kids with ADHD when they come home from school? And several of them actually made that face and noise. They come home and they just poop out. They can't really hold it together anymore. And then they're expected to do homework. And so this is really hard for them because they've spent all day doing stuff that's often very challenging, both behaviorally and intellectually. And then they come home and they have to do more of it. Many children with ADHD have a high IQ, but they're often low achieving and inattentive at school. These kids are often called 2E kids, twice exceptional kids. Super bright, but can't actually manifest their intelligence in their actions, in their performance at school. And that is usually because there's a discrepancy inside, and what we call an internal discrepancy, between the level at which they comprehend things and the level at which they're able to produce material, show their work, and attend in class. Um, this type of within-person difference occurs in about 35% of kids with ADHD. And so if your child has been evaluated, what that looks like is their verbal comprehension might be really high and their working memory might be 20 points lower. And this is very internally frustrating and confusing for kids. So let's talk a little bit about ADHD and learning disabilities and how commonly they occur. So reading disabilities, dyslexia, and other types of language-based learning disabilities occur between 33% and 45% of the time in kids with ADHD. Mathematics disabilities, often known as dyscalculia, occur between 20 and 30% of the time, and writing occurs between 57% and 65% of the time. That's really high. In fact, in my practice and in my experience, I rarely meet kids with ADHD who don't struggle with writing. Why? Because writing uses every executive functioning skill, all of them: impulse control, emotional control, working memory, organization, planning, prioritizing, sustained persistence, goal-directed persistence, initiation. All of these executive functioning skills are necessary when you're writing something. So schools are mandated to provide services for kids who are shown to have a need for services, whether that's an individualized education plan or what we call a 504 plan. George DuPaul of Lehigh University recently completed a study that I found deeply disturbing. And what he found is that 1 in 3 students with ADHD received no school-based interventions. 2 out of 3 kids with ADHD received no classroom management for disruptive behaviors, and 1 in 5 students with ADHD who experienced significant academic and social impairment received no school interventions at all. And these gaps were especially evident in children and adolescents from non-English speaking families or lower income families. Now, Gina has asked that she has a 10-year-old fifth grade daughter and has the exact behavior I'm describing, mentally exhausted at the end of the school day, going to start tutoring for reading comprehension, don't know what to do about it, exhausted after school by 3:15, and Vyvanse wears off at 5. This is such a common refrain that I hear from parents over and over again, that your child comes home and they're just too tired to do homework, and yet you only have a small window when their medication is still in their brain helping them concentrate to do homework. And so the question that I would ask you is, how long a break could you give your child when they come home from school so that they can have a rest, a brain rest, before they have to start doing homework? And I would suggest somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And decide in advance with your daughter or son what would be a break for them. They need time to just decompress, and then to set up a work study program like the one we're going to talk about later, that's structured with built-in breaks. I promise, Gina, I'll get back to that structured homework plan a little bit later. So I'd like to ask you right now, and if you could put this in the chat, that would be great. What areas of school does your son or daughter enjoy? What areas do they dislike and struggle with? Are they receiving services at school? And if so, are these services helpful? So you'll see that these are the questions in the first one of the first pages of your handout. So I'd like you to share your answers with the rest of us so we can have a broader discussion as a community. Gina says that her daughter loves math, and that's great. And I bet it's easier for her to do her math homework than do her other homework. One of the things that I want to suggest to you about helping your kids do their homework is to make an order with them of their homework. So what's homework that's easy for them to do because they like it? What's homework that's hard for them to do, either because it's challenging for them and they're not good at it, or they just don't like it? And what's somewhere in the middle? Because we want to set up a homework plan where we have an order that your kids approach their work that makes sense for them. Christina shares that my junior in high school does receive IEP services but doesn't want to attend. He would rather hang out with his friends because he feels like his head is tired. And Mari says that your daughter enjoys creative things, listening to stories and drama, memorizing sports, but anything that's writing based is hard. Winnie, her 6-year-old, loves PE, and you're starting the IEP process now. So when your kids come home and they're tired, that makes perfect sense. Let's validate that. Let's use compassion for that. And let's say, you know what, I know you're tired after school. Let's figure out what's a reasonable break for you to take, where you can still actually have some of your medication, if you're on it, in your brain to do your homework, or if you're not on medication, where you're not too tired, before dinner to start working on your homework. So and that's important for you to assess early on. When I discuss the order at which kids like to do homework, what I'm talking about is that you make a plan with them. Some kids really like to do the hard thing first and get it over with. Some kids like to do the easy thing and kind of warm up and get into it. Find out for your child what's the order of doing work that they like. I work with one little boy who calls himself Foggy Brain. He's in 6th grade. He likes to do the hard thing first. He wants to get it over with because his brain gets increasingly more tired and distracted as he does the homework. So he starts with the hard thing. Then he does the medium task, and then he does the easy thing. Now, the easy thing doesn't mean that it's academically not challenging. It's easy for him. He likes reading, and he likes history. So he does those things first. He does those things last, excuse me. He really dislikes science, so he does that first. And we've also set up something of a time plan. We're going to talk about this a little bit later when I talk about avoiding the homework hassle. So what I just would like you to do right now is think about what order your child would probably like to do their work, knowing as you know them what they seem to enjoy and what they don't. Of course, you're going to have a conversation with them about it. You're not going to tell them what to do without that conversation. And that's where that collaboration piece comes in. So I want to go back to something I was saying about different subject areas and learning disabilities. So math and reading respond really well to direct instruction and tutoring, but writing is more complicated. Um, ADHD medication, by the way, has been found to improve areas of learning disabilities such as math and reading because it improves the efficiency of the dopamine and norepinephrine channels of the brain, and so things are retained more efficiently and effectively. Not perfectly, and we still have to teach skills, but the connections are made, more more efficiently and directly, so that there's more hope that the skills that you're teaching are going to really stick. Now, I said earlier that writing is tough because it uses all of the executive functioning skills, and I want to give an example from Alex, age 11. He told me, I sit there for 15 minutes and not have a single thing on my paper because I'm thinking. And when the teacher says just write something, I can't get more than 3 words out. It's bad. Do any of your children have problems with writing? If so, let me know because I'd really like to spend a little more time on that tonight. Mari says, out of a lot of trial and error, we've discovered in homeschool that if we start super early at 8 a.m. or before, we can get much better productivity and less meltdowns. That's because kids are more alert in the morning. They've had a good night's sleep, their brains are fresh. If they're taking medication, it's kicked in, they're ready to study. I had a client, a young woman who's in 8th grade, and her schedule, was pumped out by a computer. And on this schedule, she had in the morning her specials. So she had art or music or I think the third one was computers. And then she had, she was taking a language. And then she had all of her more academic classes later in the day. And so she was falling apart by her second two periods, which were science and English, because she just didn't have, number one, as much medication in her system. And number two, she wasn't as, she was fatigued. She was already mentally fatigued. And she still had levels of medication, of course, because didn't exactly leave her system until later in the day. But she felt less focused. And as it turned out, she did need a booster in the middle of the day. So Christina says, my son has a creative imagination, but it's painful for him to get it on paper. That's so true for many kids with ADHD. And what I really encourage parents to do is to help their kids in their IEP or their 504 meetings by working with their teachers to be able to present information that they have in alternative ways. Maybe they can give a talk. Maybe they can make a PowerPoint. Maybe they could write a song. I had a history teacher who allowed one child who was very musically gifted and loved to write music to write a song about I think it was about one of the founding fathers. They were studying the American Constitution. And the kid was really excited because he got to be clever and play the guitar. And the teacher liked it so much that he told the other history teachers in the high school, and the student went around to all the classes and performed it. So it is hard to take a creative imagination and put it on paper. The other thing that's very helpful for kids like this is a Dragon Speak or some sort of software where kids can speak their ideas, because usually that's not as difficult for them. And then the software will translate it into a document that can then be edited and worked with later. Um, uh, Elaborating and writing is difficult for children. And that's because, as I said, writing uses all of the executive functioning skills. And for many of these kids, just getting something out is such a triumph, that really taking more time to elaborate on specifics, or sort of increase what they're saying or articulate what they're saying is very difficult. And that's partially because a lot of kids with ADHD are very concrete thinkers. But I think it's much more because there's this internal difficulty with writing. And one of the things that I like to use for kids, if we can find one that works for your child, is a graphic organizer. There's actually one out which I can send you that looks like a hamburger. And so the top is the bun, and the top is essentially the topic sentence of a paragraph. And then there's there's a 1 and some lines for the first sentence, 2 for the second sentence, 3 for the third sentence, and then 4 is the bun on the bottom, which is the concluding sentence. And what I like about that is you could have your child say, okay, just write the top bun sentence. That's all we're going to do right now. Or just write the piece of lettuce that's going under the bun. So you can sort of play with it and make it fun. Your children's teachers might have other graphic organizers that may make sense for your child's brain. And if we can try to make writing more fun and take some of the pressure off, that would help. There's a lot of pressure on kids with ADHD to write something that's good. because they struggle with it so much. They already feel like they're doing a bad job. And so that extra pressure makes it even harder for them to articulate their ideas. So, I want to give a few specific interventions for different kinds of learning disabilities, which is what we are talking about. We're talking a lot about writing, but I want to sort of stay focused on this. So, when your child is diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, I think audiobooks are a must, because a lot of times kids can process information through their auditory channel more efficiently, and they like that. They can listen to a book and, work out on your stationary bike, or walk around the house, or tap their feet. It's easier for them to understand that. It's not in place of reading, but it can be used as an adjunct. And for younger children who are learning to read and struggling, sometimes having the audiobooks with the actual book and reading along with it can be helpful. Um, Pictures of directions and schedules can be useful for kids who are dyslexic rather than actually writing everything down. Although we say for kids with ADHD, writing things down is helpful. If you're struggling with reading, using pictures can be helpful. I had one mother who would take a picture, who every year at the beginning of school would take a picture of her daughter with her coat on and her lunchbox and her backpack, and she would take the picture and then she'd put it up on the refrigerator and say, "Do you look like this?" Question mark. If so, you're ready for school. If not, what's missing? And that was really helpful to this child. Excuse me, I'm going to take my scarf off. It was really helpful to this child because she would just go and look at the picture rather than have to read words that were challenging. I think that in fifth grade, they're expected to know how to write, Gina's saying, no graphic organizers. Well, let's think about what we learned last time. What we learned last time is that kids with ADHD brains mature up to 3 years behind in certain areas of executive functioning skills than neurotypical brains, particularly around writing, because writing uses all of those executive functioning skills. So I think that if you're working with a school and the teacher says, "Ugh, you're in fifth grade, you should already know how to do this, no graphic organizers," your response needs to be educating and enlightening that teacher and the school and saying, "Well, actually, writing is the hardest area for most kids with ADHD. In fact, almost 70% of kids with ADHD struggle with writing." For dyscalculia, for math, for a math disability, you want to talk with them about how to solve problems. A lot of kids with ADHD who have math disabilities actually can talk through math problems very well. It's the application of the math in terms of writing it down, or the steps of problem solving where they can get tripped up. So again, just like in papers, having them talk to you about their thinking is where we want to start, because we want them to be thinking about these numbers and these higher order questions in ways that they're learning in school, even if they can't necessarily apply them on paper. We want to help students with math challenges write out charts or draw sketches or make a whole flow sequence to help them solve problems. Make sure they have a list of the math formulas rather than trying to memorize them, because with their working memory challenges, it's going to be harder for them and take them longer to remember the formulas. And that is not cheating. It's called cueing. Um, when kids have word problems and numerical problems, they should be kept separately. Word problems are often more challenging for many kids with and without ADHD, but I've noticed that kids with ADHD struggle with word problems more. So let's keep those word problems separate, because if there's numerical problems and then word problems and then numerical problems, their whole math homework is going to be dragged down by the word problems, when actually they're probably pretty good at the numerical ones. So what we'd like to do is have them do the numerical stuff and then have some accommodations on the word problems where they struggle. Mary says long division on the desk, the long division man on the desk has been super helpful as a visual aha, and yes to word problems as being challenging. We've talked a lot about writing and written expression as a disability, and it's really important to give kids with ADHD extra time to take notes if they have to take notes. And I want to talk about note taking. Note taking is hard if you don't have ADHD. How many of us, and you can raise your hand if this is true for you, will go to a meeting or go to a seminar and someone's talking and you're trying to write the notes and listen to what they're saying, and if you don't have a handout of their slides, you really are struggling. Or you have a handout of their slides and what they're saying, the key points aren't on their slides. It's a challenge, and it's super challenging for kids with ADHD. It's really important that kids with ADHD have typed copies of classroom notes or outlines of those classroom notes that they can take little notes on themselves, but they can actually listen. I had a client tell me that this happens to her all the time. She's in class, she's listening, she's trying really to take the notes, and then in the process of taking notes, she'll notice, oh, I don't like how I wrote that word. And then she'll miss like 3 sentences that the teacher said, and she feels lost, and she knows she's missed those notes. Like she can catch up in terms of her auditory comprehension, but she can't keep up in terms of what she's writing, and then she doesn't know like what to do or who to ask, and she's embarrassed. Um, Kids really benefit from using keyboards if they have ADHD. And so Chromebooks, schools that actually give kids, whether it's MacBook Airs or iPads, some keyboard can help because it is easier to just type and to pay attention to the person in the front than it is to handwrite for these kids. And so we want to give them that option of doing something that's easy for them. Um, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Um, we want to have kids with ADHD start writing assignments earlier and have support in breaking them down into manageable chunks. It's very hard for kids with ADHD to do writing assignments pretty much of any size, and particularly when you get up to high school and you have to write a 10-page paper, they need a lot of support in breaking that down. And so it's good to start that practice of breaking down in elementary school. Um, let's see. Gina Gavin, can you give an example of how that's exactly executed in a classroom, extra time to take notes? Yes. And the way that's executed is that what I mean is that the teacher would be willing to repeat something if your child is not able to keep up with taking notes as everyone else, or have time when the classroom is finished to continue writing the things that they're still thinking about. I think that's important because there'll be a lesson and then you'll move to the next thing, and the child with ADHD may still be processing, because their processing might be a little bit slower, what was just taught, and they may need some extra time to finish writing what they just learned. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about intervention practices that improve executive functioning skills at school. So we want to teach kids with ADHD about executive functioning skills. We want to teach them this so that they have knowledge about things they're good at and things they struggle with. And we want to work with their sense of what makes sense to them, and teach them how to advocate for their needs. So I worked with a student, this was many years ago, and she was transitioning from her middle school, 8th grade, into 9th grade. And it was at the same high school. It was a high school that went 7 to 12. And when she went into 9th grade, she had a new English teacher. And she came into my office a few weeks into the semester, and she was upset, and she said, "Dr. Sharon, I think I'm depressed. I'm depressed." Ninth grade girls, I'm depressed. And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And she said, "Well, I failed 2 spelling tests." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, my English teacher's given me 2 spelling tests and I failed." And I said, "Wait a minute. I don't think you're supposed to take spelling tests." And I went to her file and I opened it up and I saw in her IEP, no spelling tests. Why? Because she had ADHD, she had also had dyslexia, and she had an auditory processing problem. She was not supposed to take spelling tests. So she said, "Really?" I said, "Really?" She said, "What do you think I should do?" And I said, "I think you should talk to your strategies teacher and have her speak to your English teacher." So the next week she came back to my office and she said, "Well, my strategies teacher said I had to go with her to talk to my English teacher. And that was really scary, but I did it. And now I don't have to take spelling tests. I get to write sentences with the words instead, which is much better for me. So we want kids to to have a language to talk about their challenges, and we don't want to necessarily use the word disorder. So we talked last time about having your child name their brain. Is it a fast brain? Is it a wandering brain? Is it a sleepy brain? And that we also want them to name some of their challenges. When kids come to my office, I'll ask them, "Tell me what you think you're good at." And they'll say, "Oh, I'm good at math," or "I'm really good at PE," or "I love to run," or "I like reading or drawing." I want to know what they're good at. Okay. And then I want to know, what do they have to do in order to be good at that? So you're good at math. Tell me what that's like. What does it mean when you're good at math? What do you do? Well, I have when you're doing math, what do you do when you're doing math? Oh, well, I have my pencil and I like to think about numbers. Get some information. We want to identify what their executive functioning strengths and weaknesses are. And if you've already had your child evaluated, you should have that information in your testing report. And it would be worth having a conversation as a family about, let's talk about our brains. I know this is kind of crazy, but we're going to have a family brain conversation, a brain evening. And what's something that your brain is good at? And we could go around the room and say something our brains are good at. And what's something that your brain really struggles with? And we could go around the room with that. It would be helpful for your child to understand what's challenging for them and not feel ashamed about it, but just be able to own it. Um, are you able to do that with your child? Um, when you teach kids about executive functioning skills and what they are, you change the conversation from self blame and failure to something they can actually work on. So I'd like to ask you if you could raise your hand if you were able to ask your kids in the past week what kinds of brains they have, and if you'd be willing to share their answers. I'd really like to hear what your kids said about what kinds of brains they have. You tried that with your 6-year-old and he was confused. What do you mean, Winnie? So you said, name your brain. So you said he was confused. Does that mean that he didn't know what kind of brain he had, or he didn't understand the question? So he may not have understood the question. Were you able to give him an example? So, I actually have a worry brain. My brain worries. I'm wondering if you think you have a fast brain, makes your body move fast, or do you have sort of a kind of a dreamy brain? You like to think about different things. I understand that he would be confused as a 6-year-old. Tried to give an example without leading him, so he just didn't understand. Could you give him what I call a directed choice, which is you offer 2 solutions, you offer 2 suggestions and see which one resonates with him based on what you know about him. So, based on what I know about you, I think you might have a this brain or a that brain. What do you think? And I call that directed choice, and that's good in lots of areas with kids with ADHD. Anybody else try asking their kids what kind of brains they had and got an answer? Christina, can you share what you got from your son? Okay, so Christina has her hand raised, but she's not sharing. Maybe that didn't work. He said his brain is all over the place. Excellent. He has an all over the place brain. Wow, that's lots of information. Must be challenging for him though, because he can't actually keep his brain in the place that he might want it to go. But having an all over the place brain is a great description. Does anybody else have a child who thinks their brain might be all over the place? If you do, let us know. Oh, Mari says yes. Great. So we're talking about educating kids about their executive functioning skills. And a lot of times schools provide scaffolding to help kids learn ways to live with their challenges. But what happens is they'll take that scaffolding away once they see that they've successfully mastered that challenge. And that's unfortunate because essentially what has to happen is you have the scaffolding, you master the challenge, and you keep the scaffolding just a little bit longer until the mastery of that challenge is well encoded in the brain. And so you want to make sure that you're working with the school that they don't take away that scaffolding too quickly. So let's talk about some direct classroom interventions. We want to break learning into smaller steps. And we want teachers to supply regular, quality, positive feedback to your children. Remember, last week we talked about the positivity ratio being 3 to 1. We want to have teachers use diagrams, pictures, or graphics to augment what they're saying in words. Model instructional practices that they want students to follow. I'd like you to do this, and then have them actually do the thing they want the kid to do, so that the child understands not just through hearing but through seeing what they're supposed to do. And we want them to provide prompts for strategies. Everybody, we're going to come into, welcome to class. We're going to be talking about this book. So in order for you to look like a learner, I'd like you to get your book out of your desk and put it on your desk. And when your book is on your desk, I know that you're ready to start using specific prompts and steps that a child can remember, and can look around the room and he'll see that other people have their book on their desk. That's what you're supposed to do. Other examples would be to engage students in the process of learning by asking them questions like, what strategy are you using right now to write this topic sentence, or to complete this science experiment? How could we apply this strategy to a different task in the classroom? When teachers use scaffolding, we call this heavily mediated instruction, and it's also known as explicit instruction. And once kids acquire the skill, the kids will move towards the goal of student-mediated instruction. And that's something that we're aiming for with all of kids. So, how can we help kids focus more at school or home with homework? Now we know that people who have chronic difficulties with inattention have some areas in which they can pay attention with no problem. And focus is a dynamic process of choosing what's critical to notice and what isn't. It's like a flashlight. I call it the spotlight on your head. And I like to ask kids, where is your spotlight right now? What is your spotlight shining on? That will help them understand that they are directing their focus in one way, or they're not directing their focus at all. And if they're all over the place, which place could they pick to direct their focus? Now, ADHD brains need for things to be engaging in order to accomplish them. This is how we're going to motivate kids with ADHD. And believe it or not, The ability to derive inherent satisfaction from completing a task doesn't emerge until late adolescence or the early 20s. And if you add the 3 years for the ADHD brain, that means in the early 20s or mid 20s. Inherent satisfaction. So there are two types of motivation. Now, interest fosters motivation. The first type of motivation is extrinsic motivation, and it refers to an outside request or reward or responsibility that depends on achieving a goal. You turn in your permission form for the class trip on Tuesday, or you can't go on Wednesday. That's how it works. Intrinsic motivation, means striving toward a goal for personal satisfaction or accomplishment. This is the thing that develops in the late teens or early 20s. For example, you attempt to break your record on a favorite computer game. So it's developing through childhood and adolescence, but it really coalesces toward the end of adolescence, the beginning of the 20s. When we use incentives, we are able to motivate kids with ADHD. The challenge is keeping those incentives interesting because kids with ADHD will get bored with them. We want to use incentives that matter, including time with you. And incentives are not bribes. A bribe is here's $5, go mow the lawn. An incentive is mow the lawn and I'll pay you the $5. And so when we're looking at things that are unpleasant tasks, such as doing homework, we have to incentivize them. Now, I'd like to ask you, and you see on your handout sheet, what types of incentives appeal to your sons or daughters? What do they like to do, either on their own or with you? And please share, because I think it's really important for us to get a nice list of incentives that kids like so that we can brainstorm together about how we're going to use those incentives with our kids. So please type in the chat some of the incentives that you think are appealing to your kids. I'll continue speaking about initiation and how we can help kids get started. But I'd love it if you could put in some incentives that that appeal to your kids that we could talk about as a group. So we want to collaborate when we choose incentives. Successful collaborations include brainstorming ideas without judgment or grimaces, being open to your child's ideas and willing to try them, and expecting to renegotiate if programs don't work as part of trial and error learning. Checking in regularly to assess and reassess. So of course, screens are a big incentive for most kids today. Sometimes it could be going to the Dairy Queen, as Christina says, or eating out, picking a toy for the dog. Only incentives that seem to work right now are screen time. So let's talk a little bit. Listening to favorite audiobooks, that's great. I'm really excited by all these options. So I'm going to continue to talk about how to get started on helping kids with homework. So in order to avoid the homework hassle, what we have to do is we have to create family work time. And the reason that we have to create family work time is most kids with ADHD will benefit from a body double, someone who's in their sphere while they're working. You may be sitting at the table doing your own stuff at the computer while your son or daughter is doing their computer homework. You may be doing something that's not computer related when your child is doing worksheets. You're available to answer questions if they have them, and you're showing them that they're not alone in having to do work that they may not like to do. Right? So this family work time is really important. Plus, for those of you, and there's a few of you in the group who have kids who are a little bit older in middle and high school, you can keep an eye on the screens that they're using. A lot of times kids as they get older will switch screens. You'll think they're doing homework, but they really have a tab open for YouTube, and that's what they're doing. We want to teach kids to have one browser only for their homework and a separate browser for their fun stuff. And their fun stuff is the incentive that's going to help them do their homework. Now, I want to tell you that I looked through all of your responses about who your child is and where you are in the process. And we have a number of parents whose kids are in elementary school, several of who have been evaluated, a few who are getting evaluated now, and then we have a few in middle and high school. So we really have the whole range of child development with us in this class, which is great because those of you who are younger can see what's ahead, and those of you who are in high school will get some tips about what's next, middle school also. So we're all going to help each other in this process because honestly, things cycle around. The screen time issue is important for kids who are 6 and kids who are 16. So when we're doing family work time, the first piece is we're going to determine the ideal order of doing work. Hard, medium, easy, easy, hard, medium. Figure that out with your son or daughter in a calm moment, not when it's time to do homework. At a non-homework time, you're going to have this conversation. Now, once you've decided what the flow of work is, how long can your child focus before they need a break? And if you could write some of these times down, that would be helpful for me in terms of the kinds of suggestions I'm going to make. So how long can your child work? It's typical for kids in elementary school to be able to work anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. Usually after a work period of that nature, they'll need a 5-minute break. For middle school kids, it can be anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. 40 minutes is pretty much on an outlier. It's more like 20 or 30 minutes. And again, a 5-minute break. And then for high schoolers, they can usually work up to 45 minutes to an hour, particularly if they hyperfocus. And what I've heard from kids who are in high school and some in 8th grade in middle school is that they love to hyperfocus because they click in and then they go. It's like they're on that ride and they're grooving and they don't want to stop because they can't get back into the groove. And so one of the things that we have to do is explain to them that actually after about an hour, your brain needs a break. In fact, most brains need a break. The brain needs time to integrate information. Think about yourself. Are you ever working on a project or a report for work, and you're cooking along, and your watch sends you a message that you need to take a shower because you're going somewhere for dinner with your family. And when you're in the shower, your brain comes up with this great idea that you just have to write down, or you want to make sure you remember. That's true for kids too. They need some time to integrate, particularly kids with ADHD. So after about a 25-minute, any work period, whatever you determine, they should have a 5-minute break. And that break is part of the incentives that you've decided. It's not the ultimate incentive, and I'm going to explain what I mean. And so let's say that your child has a book report that they need to do. And they've written the book report, but they have to prepare an oral discussion. And they're postponing this, or what I call creative procrastination, because they don't really like talking in front of the class. So it's due in a day. It's now Sunday, and the project is due tomorrow. So we can't procrastinate anymore. And let's say that your child is 10. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a work period. You're going to and your child can work, let's say, for 15 minutes. Work for 15 minutes, take a 5-minute break. And that break should be anything, and this is what I've heard, so I'm just going to throw out these suggestions. Snack, running around the living room, doing jumping jacks, playing with a pet, going to the bathroom, having a drink, a quick game of cards. Sometimes kids like that. Sometimes kids will like to just talk. about anything that's on their mind, they have that 5-minute break. Then your son may be able to work for, let's say, another 15 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and if there's any work left after that, to do that for 10 minutes. And now here's the big carrot, the incentive that they want to earn, and that is the screen time. So let's talk a little bit about the screen time, because this is a real issue for many families. You need to decide with your partner or on your own if you're a solo parent, how much screen time per day you want your child to have, excluding schoolwork, because schoolwork is not fun screen time. Schoolwork is just screen time. How much fun screen time do you want your child to have? And that screen time should have an amount. So let's say your child can have an hour a day. 30 minutes of that screen time is an automatic gimme. Automatic. They get that screen time maybe for their half hour when they come home from school. They need to de-stress. They want to play on their iPad or watch a show or whatever it is. Then, if they ease off the device with no arguing, which would mean that they get a warning and then another warning about 2 minutes before. So maybe a 5-minute warning, unless they're playing a multiplayer game, in which case they need like a 15-minute warning because it's a community event and you can't just stop in 5 minutes. So if it's a multiplayer game, they probably need a 15-minute warning. If they're just doing something on their own, they can probably do a 5-minute warning and a second 1-minute warning, and then time to get off. And you need to be present, and you need to have these warnings as well, so that you can go to them and say, this is your 5-minute warning, eye contact, your eyes on my eyes, this is your 5-minute warning. And even if it goes out into the stratosphere, you've told them. If they get off their device without tantruming, they earn the privilege of more screen time later. Then you can use screen time as a carrot for completing homework. But if they don't get off their device, then you have to have other backup incentives. And that's where I think a lot of families struggle. And those backup incentives, if not primary incentives, should be time doing something fun with you. Make a list of what that might be. Maybe it's coloring. Maybe it's shooting some hoops. Maybe it's doing a puzzle. Maybe there's a favorite TV show that you want to watch together. That's what we're talking about here. We want to incentivize the work and then have them earn a carrot at the end. Do you have any questions about this? If you do, please ask them, because I want to make sure that this is well understood. When you create your structured homework time, it's a plan that includes timed, pre-planned breaks. So the amount of the break is planned and agreed upon, like it's a 5-minute break. Here are the things you can do. The other things are not options. And when you're finished your work, you've earned a special something, whatever that incentive is. And I suggest you talk with your kids about it. And if possible, have it be something that you can engage with them on. Most of us are so busy in our lives that we don't get to spend enough time with our kids. So if you can suck it up and do 15 minutes of a computer game, or watch a show, or watch a YouTube video, or listen to music, something where you can be together, I highly encourage you to do that. I also want to say that it's very important for you to stay out of your child's homework. It needs to be theirs. And it needs to be theirs because their teachers have to assess realistically and honestly how they're doing it in school. If you are involved in their homework, they cannot assess how your child is doing, and therefore your child will not be able to receive the services that they need. So please, you may need to help them make sure their homework is turned in. That's a separate issue. What I would encourage you to do if your child has difficulty turning homework in is to have them have a twofold turn-in method. The first method is you take a picture of the completed homework and email it to the teacher. The second method is that they have a place in their folder where they keep homework and they have a cue from the teacher to turn it in. That is the double method that I found to be most successful. In high school, most teachers will not do this, unfortunately. They'll say a general, turn your homework in, and unless your child's name is called or this teacher is standing right next to your child to say, a Darlene, that means you, the homework may not get turned in, which is why the email homework agreement is so important. For middle and high school kids, you need to check that their homework is completed because you want to make sure they press the send button. A lot of middle school and high school kids with ADHD will do their homework and then they'll forget to press the send button. In our last class, we're going to talk about the effect of technology on learning and the challenges of technological learning for kids with ADHD in terms of switching screens and media multitasking. But for now, I just want to help you avoid the homework hassle by implementing some of these strategies. So we have also in your handout, you'll see that there were two types of homework forms. One was for elementary school parents and one was for high school parents. These are middle and high school parents, excuse me. These are forms for you to give you an idea of what you can do if you want to create a homeschool connection. And to help your kids learn how to keep track of what their assignments are. That's very difficult for kids, particularly in schools as you get older when everything is online. I know that when schools are using Google School, for example, the assignments will be on one screen, but the actual work will be on another screen, and so the kids will have to switch back and forth between screens, which is extremely frustrating for them. In those instances, print out the assignment, and then they can just have the screen open and available for the work that they're doing without having to switch. That media multitasking is depleting for brains, and it only fosters inattention, which is already a struggle for kids with ADHD at the end of the day. So right now we have about 15 minutes for questions. I'm hoping that you have questions about schools, school interventions, things that you'd like your school to be doing that they're not, or more questions about dealing with homework. So let's get started and start typing. I'm ready to talk a little bit more about school. So I want to summarize while I'm waiting for some of your questions that when you're putting the 5 C's into action where school is concerned, you're going to notice what triggers you about your child's challenges at school. Because we all have what can be referred to as our invisible backpack of issues related to school. And we bring this invisible backpack with us whenever we deal with any issues related to school for our children. We want to protect them, we want to defend them, we want to make sure that their experience is as positive as possible. So try to take an inventory of what triggers you about your child's school experience and talk to someone about it, get some help, maybe join a CHAD support group. Those can be really useful for finding good solutions that you may not have thought of. Again, you want to work with your classroom teacher or the school to concentrate on one behavior. Kids with ADHD are doing the best they can with the resources they have available to them at that time. Overwhelming them with 4 or 5 things they need to do differently isn't fair to them. And honestly, it's not going to help them succeed. So try to pick one type of executive functioning that you'd like to see improved at home and at school. Maybe it's organization. And that might be the executive functioning skill that you work on all year. Maybe you're color coding binder. Maybe you're color coding subjects. Maybe you're helping them work on their binder every week. I had a parent who went in each week. The kids were expected to clean their desks on Fridays, and this really was very difficult for this for this boy, and particularly in 4th and 5th grade. And he couldn't do it. He was frustrated. His teacher was frustrated, and so we worked out a plan where Friday after school, when the teacher was still in the classroom finishing up and pulling things together for Monday, this child's father would come in, and they would spend 10 minutes going through the desk, organizing the papers, and setting up the child for success for the next week. We started this in October. By the beginning of May, the child was much more able to do this on his own. And instead of the father coming in every Friday, the father was coming in once a month. You can do this with your son or daughter. Gina writes, my daughter can get extra time on tests, but she is embarrassed to be pulled out. I don't blame her. That sounds embarrassing. The option is to finish during recess. That's a terrible option, but I think recess is vital as it's the only downtime during the day. Thumbs up. I agree completely. She shouldn't have to finish the work during recess. I think the issue is, could she take her test from the beginning to the end somewhere else? And are there any other students in the class that are pulled out as well? Could she have a buddy go with her to take the test elsewhere? You know, we want to try to brainstorm about what might reduce the embarrassment. The fact is, she does better if she has the time. And my guess is that your daughter wants to do well in school. And so we have to lean into that desire of wanting to do well in school and have that overwhelm and override the fear of being embarrassed. We're all going to be embarrassed about different things. And if this is the thing that's going to help you, then we don't want to deprive you of that, because recess is not really an option. That's just not an option. I agree. Okay, so, and back to the 5 C's. It's really important, where school's concerned, that you collaborate with your kids and that you have meetings with the teacher and your child to address classroom behavior issues, classroom work issues, things about school. Show your child that you're interested in what they have to say. They don't have to be there for the whole meeting, but have them participate a little bit. It really makes a difference. And particularly if you can integrate a part of what matters to them, one of their suggestions, into whatever you're doing, you will show them that their opinion matters, and you will increase their buy-in. Make sure that both you and the teacher are focusing on consistency, trying to give the same message over and over again. Not perfectly, and when there's an exception to the pattern that you've established or the routine, that you explain that exception. It's very important. Routine is so helpful for encoding patterns and lessons into working memory, and to help the brain hold on to them. When something's done over and over and over again, kids can really grasp it. Gina says, I have a hard time staying out of her homework. When I see a mistake that is careless, she knows the answer, but it's careless. Do I let it go and let her turn it in? Okay, you're not going to like this. And this would have been hard for me too as a parent. But I would say most times, yes. If you want to look over the homework and agree with your daughter that you can make one suggestion, then do that. Pick one thing. But after, one thing, and if you have to, let her turn it in. She knows the material, but she makes careless mistakes. And that's a sad truth. And when you're not with her in school, she's still making those careless mistakes. So she's going to have to learn how to catch herself. So talk with your partner, or talk with your daughter, and come up with like 1 or 2 suggestions that you can make that won't feel like too much for her and will relieve some of your own concerned that she's not really slowing herself down to check her work. And perhaps it's enough just to say that, I noticed that there are a few things here that might not be correct. You might want to just review them. As the year is ending, it seems all the frustration on both ends gets bad. That is so true. Teachers, when they get to this time in the year, they're counting down how many actual school days are left. And that's really tough because they're frustrated and impatient, and kids pick up on it. And of course, you're left with some of your own frustration and impatience because school can be the worst area of functioning for kids with ADHD. He's having a harder time focusing, and in his mind, people are being mean to him. They might be actually not just in his mind. He may be sensitive and picking up a tone of voice that's actually really there. This is leading to him not wanting to go to school. Any suggestions? Yep, you got to go to school. And what might be helpful is to arrange a meeting with his teacher to talk about frustration at this time of year. That you notice that he's frustrated and you imagine maybe the teacher's frustrated, and what can you all do together? How can you work together to make it a successful rest of the school year, to make it through till the end, so you can all say hooray when you cross the finish line. At homeschool, we have extra teachers. That's wonderful. She can focus and be positive, but when it's me, you get all the meltdowns and procrastination. Of course, you're the parent. She can hold it together for other people, just like kids who go to school. They hold it together there, and then for you, they're going to go, how do I improve this? Also, lots of bargaining about work. It's exhausting. How do you find balance? I think it's very challenging to homeschool kids. It's not something I could have ever done. And my hat goes off to all parents who choose to homeschool their kids. I would really talk about the difference between productive procrastinating and unproductive procrastinating. Productive procrastinating is, I'm going to clean my room instead of writing my paper. Unproductive procrastinating is, I'm going to argue with you for a half hour about doing my work, so then I'm not doing my work. So what you have to do is really talk about these in the incentive model and pick one thing you want to work on. Do you want to work on how she's going to earn the thing, if earn that screen time, if she gets started and doesn't procrastinate? How are you going to set up an incentive-based program for her that matters to her? Pick one thing. Do you want to reduce the bargaining about doing the work? Do you want to reduce the procrastination? Do you want to reduce the negativity? Pick the thing, create an incentive-based program, make the tasks small. If she's procrastinating, when kids procrastinate, or they can't get started, it's because the thought of doing the work is overwhelming. It's too much. What they want to do, what you need to do is chunk it small. When I was talking about that burger graphic when you write a paper, maybe all they're going to do is write the first sentence. That's what they can do. That's the chunk for the day. And the next day, they write another sentence. Or maybe just writing a sentence is the chunk for the morning, and the afternoon is writing another one. Figure out how you're going to shrink things so that they're not intimidating. Intimidation results in procrastination. I have a 10-year-old daughter with ADHD, and she gets mad to even talk about it. Curious if there's anything in retrospect you wish your parents did for you growing up. Wow, that's a great question. Well, you all know that I don't have ADHD. I'm curious if any of you parents out there might have ADHD and what you would have liked your parents to have done. One of the things that kids tell me that they like that their parents do is that they support them. Even when they don't understand themselves, even when they can't really support themselves, when they're down on themselves, they feel like their parents are there for them. And that's really important. And I think the other thing is encouragement. Encouragement and patience. Kids talk to me about this all the time. And so if you feel like you're not able to be patient, then we're back to the very first C of self-control. What needs to happen for you to be able to be more patient with your child, for you to manage yourself in the face of their irritating sometimes, their sometimes irritating or frustrating behavior? So I see that it's time for us to stop. Thank you so much for participating. Um, if you have any follow-up questions, please save them for next week. Or if you want to ask me a question privately, please feel free to email me. Um, Next week, we're going to be talking about home life and home challenges. So if there's a particular issue that you'd like to make sure that I mention, please email it to me and I'll put it together in my talk. You'll be getting your handout for class 3 on Monday, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Have a great week, and thanks for coming.